Good evening, everyone. Let's begin with something raw. Collapse is not a word we throw around lightly. It sounds catastrophic because, for a narcissist, it is. It's not just a breakdown in confidence. It's a breakdown in identity. And as someone who has spent 2 decades studying vulnerability, shame, and authenticity, I can tell you this. Narcissistic collapse is one of the most shame-fueled meltdowns we can witness. So what exactly happens? At the heart of narcissistic behavior is shame, not the shame that says I made a mistake, but the shame that whispers I am the mistake. Narcissism, paradoxically, isn't about self-love, it's about self-protection. It's the armor people wear when the idea of being ordinary feels like annihilation. And collapse happens when that armor fails, when the admiration dries up, the power is lost, the image cracks, and when it does, the reactions can be explosive or eerily silent. Some narcissists lash out. That's called projection. Their pain is too deep, too ugly, too terrifying, so they throw it at you. You become the failure. You become the disloyal one, the manipulator, the monster. It's not accountability. It's survival. Others go inward. They may isolate, spiral into depression, or play the victim so convincingly that you start to doubt your own reality. But here's the hard truth. This collapse isn't about you. It's about them grappling with the terrifying realization that their carefully curated identity can no longer hold. What do we do with that? We set boundaries, not barriers of blame, but boundaries born from self-trust. You do not have to be cruel, but you do have to be clear. You see, one of the hardest things about loving someone who collapses like this is the urge to save them, to explain, to fix, but collapse is a teacher. It invites reflection, not rescue, and if someone refuses to meet their real self in that rubble, that's not your fault. Let me say that again, that's not your fault. So, what do narcissists do during collapse? They scramble, they blame, they unravel, they panic. Because without control, without praise, without admiration, they feel like nothing. And here's the hard, tender truth. They've always felt like nothing. They just worked very hard to hide it. But collapse isn't the end. It's an invitation, not for you to return and rebuild them, but for them to rebuild themselves if they choose to. So if you're walking away or watching someone fall apart from a distance, hold space. But hold your ground. They have a journey to take, and so do you. Collapse isn't surrender, it's a crisis of identity. When a narcissist collapses, what we often misinterpret as a breakdown is actually something much deeper, an identity in freefall. This isn't a moment of reflection or surrender. It's a moment of deep internal panic. The persona they've so carefully built begins to fracture, and behind it lies a void they've been terrified to face. Collapse doesn't mean they're finally owning their actions. It means the mask is slipping, and they're fighting to hold it in place. For them, identity isn't rooted in worthiness. It's rooted in performance. When the performance fails, they don't feel humbled. They feel erased. The collapse often comes when admiration disappears, when control slips away, or when someone close finally sets a boundary. In that moment, their world doesn't just feel threatened. It feels like it's crumbling. Imagine building your whole sense of self around how others see you, and then watching that mirror shatter. It's not just a wound to their ego. It's a rupture to their entire sense of self. And while we may see their reactions as dramatic or overblown, it's important to understand they're operating from a place of deep, unhealed identity trauma, not just arrogance or pride. Instead of turning inward with humility, the collapsing narcissist often spirals outward with rage, denial, or victimhood because the truth, their truth, is far too painful to sit with. That truth is often something like, I don't know who I am without praise, or I am not lovable unless I'm being admired. These aren't things most people say out loud, but they live there, right under the surface. Collapse threatens to expose these core fears, and so they react with whatever defenses they've used their whole lives to avoid feeling small or unworthy. And that's where it becomes dangerous for them and for those around them. Because when someone's identity is built on being seen as special, and suddenly they're not, they don't just feel disappointment. They feel annihilation, and the ones closest to them often get caught in the crossfire of that crisis. This isn't about excusing the harm they cause. It's about understanding that beneath the bravado is often a person who's terrified of being ordinary. Collapse is not surrender, it's not insight, it's the earthquake that shakes the illusion, and they'll do almost anything to rebuild it. Fast, shame is the engine of narcissistic collapse. At the core of narcissistic collapse is a shame so intense it feels life-threatening. This isn't the kind of shame that teaches or corrects. It's the kind that paralyzes and distorts. It's the voice that doesn't say, "You made a mistake," but rather, "You are the mistake." For many narcissists, shame has been with them since childhood, often buried under layers of grandiosity or charm. That shame becomes the hidden engine driving their need for admiration, perfection, and control. When that system fails, what erupts isn't just ego pain, it's the unleashing of a shame storm they've spent a lifetime avoiding. The collapse comes when something, rejection, criticism, abandonment, pulls the curtain back on the shame they've worked so hard to bury. In that moment, they don't just feel exposed, they feel completely undone. It's as if their entire self-worth was built on a house of cards and someone just blew on it. Shame doesn't whisper in those moments, it screams. It tells them they're worthless, unlovable, and broken. And because they've never learned to sit with those feelings, they panic. They fight, deflect, or shut down completely. Not because they're cruel, but because they are terrified of what that shame might reveal. This is where their relationships suffer the most. Instead of saying, "I feel ashamed," they say things like, "You've betrayed me," or "You're the reason I'm suffering." Shame becomes the fuel for blame. And in the process, those closest to them are made responsible for emotions the narcissist can't bear to feel. It becomes impossible for them to take accountability because doing so would require them to touch that shame directly. And for someone whose entire life has been shaped by escaping shame, even a glimpse of it feels too dangerous, too overwhelming to survive. Ironically, the very thing they're trying to protect, their sense of self, is what shame continues to erode. Their collapse is not a fall from power, but a confrontation with powerlessness. And until they recognize that shame is not a sign of weakness, but a signal for healing, they will stay trapped in the same cycle. The world might see the rage or the silence, but underneath it is a person drowning in shame, doing everything they can to convince others and themselves that they are not. Healing can only begin when we stop running from shame and start understanding its message. Projection becomes protection. When a narcissist begins to unravel, the world suddenly feels unsafe, not just externally, but internally. The emotional pain is so raw and threatening that they instinctively push it outward. They project their hurt, insecurity, and fear onto others because it's the only way they know how to survive emotionally. If they feel weak, they accuse someone else of being weak. If they feel rejected, they blame others for being disloyal. Projection becomes their shield, keeping the most fragile parts of themselves hidden from view, not because they're malicious, but because facing their own emotional reality feels like standing in front of a fire. This defense mechanism isn't chosen with clarity or intention. It's reflexive. The deeper the pain, the stronger the projection. It's easier to paint others as the problem than to admit, "I'm struggling," or "I feel inadequate." Vulnerability is perceived as a threat, not a strength, so emotional honesty is replaced with blame, criticism, and control. The more cornered they feel, the more fiercely they defend their distorted version of reality. In doing so, they not only distance themselves from others, but they also lose the chance to connect with the very feelings that could help them grow. The tragic irony is that projection pushes away the people who most want to help. Friends, partners, and loved ones find themselves caught in a web of accusations that make them question their own sense of truth. It's confusing, painful, and sometimes emotionally abusive, but for the narcissist, it feels like a kind of safety. If they can convince themselves that the fault lies elsewhere, they don't have to confront the shame or fear beneath the surface. The problem is that safety is false. It isolates them further and deepens the cracks in their already fragile sense of self. What we're really witnessing in those moments isn't strength, it's fear. It's the fear of being unworthy, unlovable, or fundamentally broken. Projection protects the narcissist from those terrifying thoughts, but it also locks them in a prison of emotional avoidance. True protection doesn't come from blaming others. It comes from being brave enough to face what's happening inside. But courage like that requires a level of emotional maturity they haven't yet developed. Until they do, projection will remain their armor, one that keeps them from being hurt, but also from being truly seen. The real self is too painful to face. Beneath the surface of narcissism lies a self that has been neglected, rejected, or misunderstood, often from a very young age. The grandiosity, the entitlement, the hunger for validation are not signs of confidence. They're coping mechanisms. When external applause fades and the carefully crafted image starts to crack, what's left is the version of self they've tried desperately to avoid. It's a self filled with doubt, shame, and fear. Facing that truth feels unbearable. It's not just painful, it feels like annihilation. So instead of turning inward with compassion, they reach outward for control, distraction, or domination. This avoidance of the real self isn't born from vanity, it's born from fear. It's the fear that if they were ever truly seen without the mask, no one would stay. They've spent so long building a version of themselves. They thought others would love that they've lost connection to who they really are, and when collapse happens, the performance no longer holds. They're left standing in front of a mirror that no longer flatters, no longer filters, no longer protects. That moment is terrifying because the person they see isn't strong or special. It's someone they believe isn't enough. In that fear, they often retreat further into illusion. They might rewrite the story, spin new narratives where they're the victim or the hero, because those roles feel safer than simply being human. Humanness, with all its flaws and needs, feels too vulnerable. But the more they avoid their real self, the more they suffer. Relationships falter, trust dissolves, and the emotional distance between who they are and who they pretend to be grows unbearable. Instead of growth, there is resistance. Instead of healing, there is projection. The pain compounds and the cycle continues, always avoiding the root. Healing is possible, but only when there's willingness to sit with the discomfort of the real self, to face the hurt, the fear, the unmet needs without judgment. That requires tenderness, patience, and accountability, all of which feel foreign in the world of narcissistic defense. But the truth is, the real self isn't something to fear, it's something to reclaim. It's where belonging, connection, and peace begin. Without that journey inward, collapse becomes not a turning point, but a recurring pattern, and the tragedy is that the love they've always craved lives on the other side of the self they refuse to meet. Our best boundary is self-trust. When you've been in the orbit of a narcissist, especially during collapse, confusion becomes your daily companion. You second guess your instincts, your memories, even your reality. You might ask yourself, did I cause this? Could I have done more? But the truth is, clarity begins with coming home to yourself. It's not about proving your worth or defending your truth to someone who refuses to hear it. It's about learning to trust what you feel, what you see, and what your body tells you when something feels off. Self-trust becomes your internal compass when everything else feels foggy and unstable. Boundaries are often misunderstood as walls meant to keep people out, but in reality, they are the most honest expression of self-respect. When a narcissist collapses, they may demand more from you, more loyalty, more silence, more understanding at the exact moment when they are offering you less. That's when self-trust matters most. It tells you when to stay, when to speak, and when to walk away. It reminds you that compassion doesn't require self-abandonment, and that saying no is not betrayal, it's alignment. You don't need permission to protect your peace. You need presence, clarity, and trust in your own voice. In the aftermath of their collapse, a narcissist may try to rewrite the story. They may paint you as the villain or the deserter because your boundary threatens their illusion. But when you trust yourself, you no longer need their version of the story to make sense of your own. Self-trust gives you the courage to hold your ground even when you're called selfish or cold. It gives you the strength to grieve what never was and to release the hope that they will suddenly see you clearly. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is stop explaining. Self-trust doesn't make the pain go away, it makes the pain bearable. It's the quiet voice that says, "I know who I am," when everything around you says otherwise. It allows you to hold space for your hurt without surrendering your dignity. It helps you resist the pull to fix, rescue, or stay too long. Trusting yourself is not about being perfect. It's about being grounded in your values, your truth, and your worth. It's what keeps you rooted when someone else's chaos threatens to uproot you. And in the end, it's what frees you to heal on your own terms.